Hello and welcome back to Chase Talks Politics. Today is June 23rd, 2020, and today we're actually going to be looking at, as we did in the last video, polls, but we're going to be looking at how accurate some of these polls are. So, there is a prediction site called 538, and they actually do pollster rankings, and they give grades on how accurate and how biased these polls are. So we're going to be looking at some of these polls that Real Clear Politics, another polling site, has. So Real Clear Politics has all these polls from a lot of different polling sites. So we're going to take a look at some of these, and we're going to take a look at some of the top pollsters and see how accurate they actually are. So we're going to look at things like how many predictions they have gotten right, whether they do phone call interviews, things like that, and they're biased towards one political party. So I'm going to go to the 538 website, and we are going to get started. So all of these polls have one thing in common. They have all favor Biden. All of these top polls by a pretty significant margin, ranging from 6% all the way to 14% in the case of CNN. So we're going to go to 538's pollster rankings. This is really helpful. I really like 538, everything that they put up. This was last updated on May 19th. So with a lot of polls coming in, I hope that they can update this soon, but it is still really accurate. So we're going to start off by looking at Emerson College. They do polls, and I look at theirs a lot. So they do not do on-the-phone interviews. They have analyzed 165 polls, and they do have a Democratic bias of 0.3%. They received an A-. So, that's a really low Democratic bias. They slightly favor the left. They're slightly biased towards the left. They don't do live caller with cell phones, but they have analyzed a lot of polls, and they are... does not say how many polls they've actually been correct on, but it does give them an A-. So they only have a slight Democratic bias. Emerson College, let me see, hang on. Let's look at Emerson College's prediction for this 2020 election as of right now. Okay, so Emerson College is giving Biden a 6% lead. They do have a slight Democratic bias, but that's a pretty accurate prediction. Considering they have a really good grade on here, I would trust that prediction, and that shows that Biden does have a significant lead. And they have done a lot of polls. They've actually done 165 polls. That's a lot, and their Democratic bias is not a lot. I mean, a lot of these polls that we're going to look at today, their bias is towards the Democrats, but only by a slight amount. So now let's look at another poll. We're going to look at NPR and PBS. So NPR and PBS, they do a lot of polls as well. So let's go ahead and look at them. Okay, here is NPR. They do live caller with cell phones, so they do on-the-phone interviews. They have only done 3 polls, so they have not done a lot. And their Democratic bias is not a lot. They do favor the left by 0.1%. And they received a B/a C on their grade. The Democratic bias is not too much but they just have not done enough polls. I mean, they've only done 3. But I believe that they did another poll with Marist College. Marist. See if that can come up. Here's Marist College. They do calls with cell phones. They have done 183 predictions. That's a good. And they received an A+, and their bias is actually towards the Republican Party by 0.3%. So let's go ahead and look at Marist College's 2020 prediction. Because they do favor the left, and they received a good grade. I mean, they do favor the right, sorry. So if they favor Joe Biden, that would be a pretty accurate prediction. Because they have a good grade, but they do slightly favor the left. Let's look at this NPR PBS Marist poll. Marist College. Let's see if they did a Biden against Trump poll. There was another good poll that they did, but that's not like a Biden versus Trump poll. It's more of okay, so Marist College is let's look at Marist College here. Let me see. Okay, here we go. They are favoring Biden by 7%. Excuse me. They are favoring Biden by 7%. So I would give the Marist College prediction. I would give that as a very accurate prediction in this 2020 election because they are favoring Biden by a significant majority. But they do slightly favor the Republican Party. And they received an A+, so that's a poll that I would trust for sure. Now we are going to look at CNN, which I believe for sure will have some bias towards the Democratic Party. Here is CNN. It's classified as CNN/opinion-based research corporation. So they do calls with cell phones. They do interviews. They have analyzed a pretty good amount of polls, 103. They received a B+, and their bias is towards the Democrats. But surprisingly, their polls is not too. It's only Democrat favoring the Democrat by just 0.0, so it's barely favoring the Democrats at all. So CNN, you may not agree a lot with their captions and their stories. And you may believe that they're broadcasting what they show on television is favoring the Democratic Party. And they are biased towards the Democrats and the way that they do interviews and things. But that's not what this is taking into account. This is taking into account their polls. And if I had to say, I would say that the CNN polls are pretty accurate. Now, I know a lot of you guys may disagree with me, but I do have some reasoning. The CNN polls, yes, they are giving Biden 14% right now, which may not be very accurate. That's the biggest lead that Biden has in any polls. But if you look back to January 2019, and I think another time this year, you would see that a CNN poll had Trump favored. I don't recall if it was Biden or against another Democratic candidate, because back then the nominee could have been any candidate. Now we know that it's Joe Biden. But back then, they had Trump favored. So CNN, they do a lot of interviews. They do a lot of research. They go into their polls. Their polls are slightly biased. But as you see here, it's only 0.0. I would say that, yes, the way that they do their television coverage and things like that would be biased towards the Democrats. the Democratic Party, but that's not what this is taking into account. This is taking into account their actual polls, so that's why they received a B+, because they are pretty accurate on their polls. And not all of their polls actually favored the Democratic Party, so that's why. So again, this poll, I know some of you guys may be shocked that they only received a B+. That they only received a B+, but this is not taking into account their television coverage or the way that they cover elections. This is strictly taking into account their actual polls. Yeah, let's look at YouGov now. Let's go ahead and look at YouGov. Or let's try and find CNBC, but I don't think, CNBC isn't on here. YouGov now. Let's look at YouGov. Okay, so, YouGov, their coverage is strictly online. So they don't do any calls via the phone, via the interviews, because it's an online. They just write articles that go along with their predictions and make polls via online. They have done a ton of polls. They have done 416. Their bias is towards the Democratic Party, but it's only by 0.4%. So a lot of these polls are biased. A lot of the polls are biased towards the Democratic Party, but most of them are not biased by a big amount. I mean, you'll see some that favor the Democrats that give them a huge lead, but most of the ones that are biased towards the Democrats are only by not by maybe 0.1 to something 0.5%. So it's not that big of a bias towards the Democrats. They received a B in this one. They analyzed 416 polls. They have a slight bias towards the Democrats. But it's strictly online, which maybe could have hurt them in this rating. Probably not too much, though. Next, let's look at Fox News. Now again, with this Fox News one, just like with CNN, this is not taking into account their television programs. CNN and Fox News are, I would say, some of you may disagree with me, but I think a lot of people would agree with me that CNN is biased towards the Democrats and Fox News is biased towards the Republicans. So this isn't taking account to Fox News coverage. This is taking into account their actual polls that they do. So, CNN, along with Fox News, the way that they cover their polls is not too biased. So, we have two polls. We have one with Fox News and the Opinion Dynamics Corporation. We have one with Fox News and Beacon Research and Shaw & Co. Research. So the method that they do these were online. It was on live television. They did not do calls. This particular one was done with the Opinion Dynamics Corporation. They did not do a live interview call. They have done 34 polls together. They received an A/a B, and their bias would be towards the Republican Party by 0.3%, which is not enough. So this is a pretty accurate poll. Next is Fox News, Beacon Research, Shaw & Co. Research. So with this one, it has a Democratic bias to 1.4%, which I don't think that there's no way that is from Fox News. I guess it could be. But I would guess that would be from Beacon Research and Shaw & Co. Research. They've done 40 polls together. They have a slight bias towards the Democrats. It's actually like 1.4%. And this was done with a telephone interview. So yeah. So CNN, the two stations, TV channels that you would think would be the most biased. So some people may disagree, but I would think CNN and Fox News. As far as CNN and Fox News polls are not that biased. CNN was 0.0 with their bias towards the Democratic Party, and Fox News was 0.3. But Fox News, in one of their polls, what they did with 2 other poll sites, it was actually a strong Democratic bias of 1.4%. And if I had to guess, I think that would come from the other 2 pollsters that they did it with. I don't think that's coming from Fox News, but it could be. So let's look at Harris, if they are on here. So if you guys are wondering, if you guys want to go look at some more polls yourself, just look up 538 pollster rankings and it'll come up. Alright, here's Harris Insights and Analytics. They were on here. They do it only online. They received they've done 169 polls. They have a bias towards the Republican Party of 1.3%, and they received a C. So they have a bias towards the Republican Party, but I guess their predictions are just not always correct. That's why probably they did not receive a good grade. CNN, their prediction was 14%. That could not be, it's probably off by a little bit. Fox News is 12%. But I think that you could trust somebody like Emerson College, who's predicting Biden by 6% as of right now in the late month of June. I think you could trust them because their bias is towards the Republicans. Most of their predictions are correct, and they're even saying that Biden has the lead. The bias in pollsters just come from people who, use too much of their own opinions in their political party who they belong to when creating their polls and when making their poll predictions. And I try not to be biased at all. I'm going to try not to be biased at all with my predictions. I'm going to go straightly off of evidence that I find and my research to make my predictions and to give you my opinions on things like that. So if you look at somebody like Survey USA, they've done 787, which is a ton. They've received an A, and they have a Democratic bias of 0.1%. So let's look at who would be the most biased. If we look at these two, TCJ Research, never heard of that, but they have done 132 polls. They received an F, and they have a strong bias. This is why. TCJ Research is a poll site that is, really biased towards the Republicans at 4.4%. So this would probably be the most biased poll because they're really biased towards the Republicans. That's really strong at 4.4%. They received a F. So that they probably, a lot of their predictions, probably even right now, favor Trump and other Republicans in Senate and House races and things like that. So that's probably because they have a lot of Republican writers. Probably a majority of their writers are Republican. So SurveyMonkey received a D- because they are strongly biased towards the Democrats. SurveyMonkey has a strong bias towards the Democratic Party. They have a 5%, which is huge. They received a D-. Their research is done only online. They don't do phone calls or anything like that. So I would not trust them. They have done 210 polls. So let's look at TCJ Research. I've never heard of that, but I'm going to Google their prediction. So they have a big bias. They received an F. In their predictions. So as you see here, 538 made an article in 2017 saying that this was a fake poll. So their polls are probably really biased. Here's their website. Okay, so in their 2012 prediction, they predicted Mitt Romney. So I can see why people would think that they're biased, because they predicted Romney by 4% in their final prediction. Yeah, so I could see how people would think that. Yeah, so I would not trust this polling site. I would not trust SurveyMonkey. I would trust more of the ones that are on TV for some reason than the ones that are online. Yeah, I would I would trust those a lot more. Like I would trust CNN more than this one that we just saw. This one really biased towards the Republicans. But if you're gonna look at a poll to make a prediction, look at somebody like Emerson College. They have students. Their bias is barely towards the Democratic Party, but I guarantee you that you're not going to find a poll that does not have a bias at all. You have writers. These writers have opinions. They have political parties who they belong to, so they have opinions themselves. So their opinions, there's going to be bias in some way because they belong to their political parties. So yeah, that is going to do it for this video. I'm making another one right now where we're going to talk about Biden and Trump's debates. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. That is it from Chase Talk Politics. I'll see you in my next video.